The Schumann resonance and our Earth, Gaia, connection between the human brain and the planet. Beyond the subtle energies, almost spiritual or astral, there is a dimension of energies that are well known and typified by academic science. We speak of forces of an electromagnetic nature, radiation fields, terrestrial magnetism, cosmic radiation, etc. The Schumann resonance falls on this spectrum. Named after the theoretical physicist who proposed and proved them, Winifred Schumann, 1880 to 1974, it consists of a band of ELF, that's extremely low frequencies, peaks of approximately 7.83 Hertz, that surrounds the Earth in the band between the ground and the ionosphere as the background of the electromagnetic field of the planet. But we have to discriminate some conceptual errors as they have been vulgarized in this way. One, that at the same time of its discovery, that given value was approximate, that is, there are zones and times of fluctuation. For example, the weather, an increase in the number of electrical storms in the world increases that frequency and conversely decreases. Second, it stated that today it is 12 Hertz, which is also variable. And third, and this is the biggest error, that this means that the Earth day has accelerated, to which today it would be 16 hours. Gross mistake, because the electromagnetic frequency of these waves has nothing to do with the speed of Earth's rotation. And in that sense, I can say that I have observed that people who repeat this mistake in good faith lack, in general, minimal training or intellectual understanding, technical or scientific. This is how it would be presented. But let's return to the starting point of the Schumann resonance and ask ourselves why the interest in that subject has aroused among many people, generally reluctant to the aseptic academic field, motivating them to internalize and, as we pointed out, sometimes echoing conclusions and proposals wrong, although I wonder if this misinformation was not precisely indirectly stimulated by intelligent services in order to make a fool of the outsider investigators of the system and consequently devalue the results they had obtained. And why such an inordinate interest of that public for this phenomenon? Because different authors have pointed out that it would have a direct link with the subtle nature of the human being. This resonance would have the same frequency as the alpha state produced by the human brain, with which they suppose that its increase or increase would translate to increasing the frequencies of the same, and this would be evidence of the quantum leap of humanity, that is, your leap forward in the opening of consciousness. And this is where we should point out some details. Correspondence principle. It's true that analogy is one of the fundamental and subtle principles in the spiritualistic understanding of the universe. Although the academics will argue that this is a fallacy, known as ergo propter hoc, that is to say, with this and therefore because of this, experimental observation constantly confirms it. However, that the human being has a cerebral behavior that has the same range as an ELF behavior of the planet where he lives and is interpreted as the Schumann resonance, acts on and modifies electrochemical activity of the brain, it would be as absurd as to maintain that the activity electrochemistry modifies the ELF of the planet, since it ignores a fundamental law of the universe, the principle of correspondence. That is to say, it is aligned with the principle, the macrocosmic and microcosmic, and the macrocosmic and microcosmic, yes, but we insist on remembering that the principle of correspondence is so called because one fact corresponds to another, but that does not mean that one of them produces the other. I urge the reader, he says, who has just arrived at these issues, perhaps to stop here and turn to deepen the concept that I am convinced is liberating in terms of open-mindedness to understand not only what we are developing here, but also the entire efficacy of esotericism itself. Electromagnetic harmonization. That said, let's get back to what we are dealing with, because we must highlight another fact. The cerebral rhythm that we know as alpha, inducer of what we perceive with a state of deep myo-relaxation, meditation, the state of mind ku, when saying Zen, etc., is not 7.8, let's round it to 8 cycles per second. It's between 8 and 12 cycles per second. And when the brain frequency changes, be it up or down, it ceases to be one type of brainwave category to transform into another that is accompanied by a different psychic picture, not the same and improved. But there is another detail to take into account. These brain frequencies that we're talking about, as we said, electrochemical, and although they act on the electromagnetic nature of human nature, they constitute just one more variable. On the other hand, the Schumann resonance is pure and exclusively electromagnetic, so that it is because of that party, that correspondence, that we must look for effects that may interest us, with which we are accepting that there is undoubtedly a relationship between Schumann's discovery and human nature, but such a link would perhaps not be psychic but electromagnetic. In this sense, any alteration of the ELF field can have an impact first in biology, in the greater or lesser intensity of the auric field, understood as the surplus part of the physical body of its bioplasmic egg or bioenergetic. Consequently, it impacts and harmonizes or disharmonizes electromagnetically and in a subtle phase bioengineerically. It's here where the knowledge and practice of bioenergetics in the paradigm of Wilhelm Reich and his disciple Alexander Lowen shows its importance, since such exercises are designed to promote auric balance as a consequence of electromagnetic balance. Also, and from this correspondence, it's quite obvious that any significant alteration of the Schumann resonance on a planetary level will result in an alteration of our own electromagnetic fields, and the abuse of the internet and Wi-Fi, the proximity of power lines and public transformers, heavy machinery in constant operation will be precisely factors that will disrupt us. Without going with the conspiracy of putting on hats made of aluminum foil while we walk through life, he points out the importance of applying the teachings of radionics, since they act precisely at that level, although in a very limited range, restricted to the person or the home where it applies. Inevitably, I will explain in an immediate work some of the options of making radionics play in our favor, but what we want here is to draw attention to the fact that the increase in disturbances in the Schumann field translate into alterations of our electromagnetic fields, and they are also behind certain illnesses, interpersonal conflicts, and so on. Can you imagine that? Okay, so they're also behind certain illnesses, interpersonal conflicts, and so on. So the parapsychological harmonization we are insisting on here must also include radionic harmonizations, or electromagnetic harmonizations, if you prefer to call them that. Gaia, but the Schumann field, as I'll call it for now on, it has a very interesting aspect about all of us, and in debt to that principle of correspondence of which we spoke, that insofar as it is an electromagnetic field, or better still, electromagnetic pulses on a greater field, also electromagnetic, but at the same time corresponding to the human electromagnetic field. Gaia, which we understand as a consciousness of our Earth, quote unquote, may well be a fact, as well as that our natural parapsychological disposition allows us to contact, tune in, and empathize, call it whatever you wish, with it. What then we must ask ourselves here is, how many spiritual or extraterrestrial contacts, how many channelings will be nothing more than the misinterpretation of Gaia speaking to us at the episodic movements that the Schumann field corresponds to a significant but not absolute number of humans? And I'll step into the void and propose my suspicion that the Schumann resonant field and the Akashic records are the same, or also that the Schumann field and the backup of the collective unconsciousness are the same. What to think about the need for human physiology for an extracerebral information repository, and for it to be that Schumann field? We will not discuss here what is a proven fact that bothers neuroscientists. The brain does not have the capacity to store the information that an average person accumulates not only in their entire life, but simply in the first 40 years of it. I'm not necessarily thinking of a conscious and autonomous Gaia that speaks to us, but rather that many phenomena that we perceive and make the mistake of interpreting literally without even going through the reflection of its symbolic nature represent how our unconscious rationalizes the impulses of the reality of Gaia. And here we must return to what we understand by reality. It's now more than it is now more than clear that it is not that it is seen and touched. What I postulate is that reality, thus the capital letters, is greater, transcendent to everyday reality, since it is limited to what we cannot so much perceive, but rather understand, so that everything that transcends the reality paradigm of an individual would be perceived, yes, but misinterpreted in its decoding. Otherwise, I say, whoever empathizes with the Schumann field consciously accesses the information. Then if you believe, and this is quite a topic, pre-existing beliefs that distort understanding and not perception of reality, that it is some ESP, past life regression, or reading of Akashic records is just one respectable personal belief, that at the end of the day, the nature of the practical result you get does not change. Why do we suspect that the Schumann field accumulates information? Because it's there. It is in it. There are not only those ELFs, or rather as that set of ELFs that in turn interact with other electromagnetic fields. As we know, radio broadcasts need two types of waves, the one we call carrier and the modulator, as in commercial AM stations. The carrier is the base emission that is then modulated by another signal, causing the first to carry the second. The carrier is a range, the modulator is information. In analogy to this, the Schumann field may be the carrier where our conscious psyches mounts the information. What then can be practical applications of this knowledge? Let's see. A. In everyday life, that a person can enter alpha at the time of low Schumann activity. There are sites on the web that give access to updated recordings of the resonance and vice versa. The Schumann sound induces the alpha state. That is, when it is closest to 7.83 Hertz, it would allow the person to access to the information both stored in it, according to the theory that we have presented, and to use it as a carrier of his psychic energy, manifesting this in a wide range of parapsychological phenomenology, preferably towards that which exists predisposition in the individual, predisposition towards one or another phenomena that is easily discriminated with a simple ESP valuation with Zener charts. In another sense, the variation of the Schumann field in turn can act, blocking or exacerbating, depending on the case, in the dragon veins, the energetic lattices of the Earth itself that we know as the Hartmann network or lines of Curie, about which we'll talk later in another work. B, in spiritual knowledge, being then a bell or resonant box of the collective unconscious, millenary concepts such as the cosmocrator, planetary genius, and of course egregor are understood, since this field would become the so-called plastic mediator well known among esotericists. Indeed, the plastic mediator has been called that which allows the psychic to materialize as the physical. To be consistent with esoteric teachings, how can an idea, however intense, jump the abyss of reality to make itself tangible? As the spiritualist currents teach in general, and very particularly as proposed by principle of mentalism, such would then be archetype images that act on, or for the human being, when the disposition of his paradigm allows him to include them in his reality. For example, when in meditation we accept without questioning and without surprise the most bizarre manifestations that may appear to us. So let's stop for a moment at this point. Almost all mediators will agree with me that what I have just stated, in the meditative state where we perceive or occur manifestations that beyond their nature propose or message in the normal waking state, that is, in the normal state. Brain beta, we would qualify as strange, and we would seek to rationalize with conventional explanations, such as saying hallucinations, believing that we explain it that way when the word hallucination is only a label that names the phenomenon but does not explain it. But in that state, we accept naturally. That is, we internalize, which is misleading, because with the same argument, we can affirm that our psyche is the one that is subsumed in the Schumann field. And I will say more. In general, esoteric authors have assumed that the plastic mediator cited is the astral plane. The point is that there still remains a remarkable difference of nature between the mental and the astral. It is there when we can propose that the Schumann field is that mediator between the psychic and the astral, and the latter, the astral, in turn, mediator with the physical. And extrapolating, we may well ask ourselves if that field in turn is not a level, plane, or limbo where certain entities of an intermediate nature remain. And finally, I'll comment on the aforementioned fact that the HARP project has been deactivated. One of the two possibilities: either it was a failure because it did not achieve the purpose, presumably to impact on the collective subconscious of the masses, and that could consist of modulations in the information field, or on the contrary, they are committed to strategies with a better cost-benefit ratio. And this is on Infinity Explorers by Anne Srivastava. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.